Welcome. In this Future Transform recording, we gather to discuss the impact of AI on scholarly research. That is, how generative AI technologies might impact the stewardship, access to, and use of scholarly collections. Our guest was the excellent Kevin Guthrie, who's the head of ITHAKA, and among other things, he was one of the leaders of getting JSTOR off the ground, and we gathered in part to celebrate JSTOR turning 30 years old. Now, in our conversation, we approached the subject of AI and scholarship from many, many different directions. I think you'll find quite a few ideas, some resources, and a lot to engage with. Hope you enjoy. Again, let me begin by welcoming everybody to the Future Transform. I'm so glad to see you all here today. We have a fantastic guest, one of the great leaders in higher education, and we have a very, very important and timely topic. First of all, we've been looking at AI for years here in the Future Transform. We approached it from numerous points of view, from AI literacy to hands-on workshops to AI ethics, AI and storytelling. But what we haven't done is looked at the intersection of AI and scholarship, on how we do scholarly research, what AI might do to enhance our work with scholarly corpus. So there is no better person to introduce this topic and talk with us than Kevin Guthrie. You've all gotten our introduction. You should all know Kevin is the president of ITHAKA in New York. So he's responsible for a whole series of services under that, from Portico to ITHAKA SNR to JSTOR. And JSTOR was one of the reasons I wanted to bring him on the program, because this is somehow, Kevin, 30 years of JSTOR. How did that get to be?
I don't know. It went by, it goes by fast for sure. No question. I mean, do you want me to just kick off here, Brian? Is that
Well, let me just first say congratulations. I mean, 30 years of your leadership and stewarding an incredibly important piece of scholarship and scholarly literature. Just my hat's off to you. That's a wonderful job.
well, you're very kind to say that, and the things you said already are overselling me, honestly. I will say that the one thing I think a lot about in terms of the 30 years is just how do we keep evolving and changing to be here for 30 more, you know, and especially given how much things are changing. I mean, right now I have to say that so I'm just going to focus in right on the technological change that we're facing right now, not the sort of geopolitical and other changes that we're facing, which we can talk about. But with respect to technology, it
Yeah.
feels so much like it felt in the mid 90s for me. And you know, I think JSTOR really was born from a technological change, right? I mean, it was 1995, 1994. Colleges and universities were connected, but individuals weren't. There was no commercial internet at that point, if you can think back that far or believe that. There was no way to connect online. America Online had just sort of started, you know, and ISPs were just starting. There really was no network connectivity for individuals or consumers. And so you had these two things that were coming together, the network and digitization. And in fact, the academy was ahead of the world because the academy was connected. Colleges and universities were connected to each other. Emails were moving back and forth. There was obviously a lot of computer capacity on colleges and universities. So when we started JSTOR at that very beginning, is that combination of network and digitization that made it possible. And you know, at that time, really what we were focused on as we started out the project was the very simple idea that print volumes that were available were hard to get to, were very expensive to maintain, were filling up shelves of libraries, and therefore, you know, just underutilized. And in fact, older literature was regarded as not being valuable. And so, you know, the start of JSTOR really came as these two technological forces coming together, and an idea that was a pretty simple one, which is really what we would now call putting something into the cloud, you know, taking something digital, putting it on the network and sharing it as a service instead of holding it locally. And so, you know, that's what we originally did, and just happened to do that at a time that was, I would say, the best time to start up something is right before it's needed. And we were lucky enough to be, and frankly, very, very, very much lucky that we had and started to work on this idea right before it was really possible. And then everything kind of came together in the late 1990s. And, I have to credit my long-term mentor and tremendous friend and leader, Bill Bowen, who it was
Indeed.
really his idea. And he gave me the opportunity to work on this. And, that was a gift of a lifetime to be able to work in this area. But Bill really was the one who had the idea for JSTOR and kind of got it started and gave me the opportunity to work on it. So that's kind of the technological brief history of what JSTOR was at that time.
Indeed, Bill was a giant. And if anyone in the audience is curious about JSTOR, I do commend our mutual friend Roger Schoenfeld's book on JSTOR, which is a fine history of it. Well, Kevin, if the 1990s saw, as you say, the rise of network technology and digitization, giving us a challenge as well as opportunity for scholarly publishing. Now that we're seeing generative AI really take off at a worldwide level with incredible speed, with huge amounts of funding and vast amounts of potential transformation, what does that represent to the scholarly record and the scholarship now? Where might that take us?
Yeah, that's obviously a fantastic question, and let me talk a little bit about it from the standpoint of JSTOR for a minute. I mean, I think in November, so we like you hear this from everyone who works in this area. Oh, we were working on machine learning for a long time before all of this, and that's all true. I mean, I think everybody has been working on machine learning in a variety of ways. We were working on it to try to build better search capability through semantic indexing,
Mhm.
different kinds of machine learning in the background. And I'll be honest, like during that period, it was hard to figure out how to make it really matter. I mean, in a way that was evident to a user. We could improve the search discovery, we could improve results.
Mhm.
Those were good, but they're all very marginal and like significant investments in machine learning, not really seeming to deliver that much value. And then November 22, came and ChatGPT hit the world. And I very much remember, immediately, that New York Times article and all this sort of fanfare, but just this notion that you could talk to the computer and it would talk back to you, whether that's through your fingers or literally, with audio. That notion of a conversation with the computer seemed like a fundamental change. And I felt immediately like, oh, if you're not somehow providing an interface that allows somebody to converse with you in that way, you're going to be irrelevant. And I didn't know if that was like going to be a year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever, but I think that felt pretty important right away. Right as I saw those articles, and I was my first reaction was, well, what do we do about it? What to
Right.
do about that? And so I think that I think I frame that as sort of start of an answer to your question, because I think that you have to kind of get into these technologies and use them in order to understand them and to have an opportunity to see where they're going to go. And so we kind of put a group together along the side, if you will, um, to work on that question. Would it be possible for us to use these technologies to create a conversation for a user using JSTOR? And then we learned that it was possible to do retrieval augmented generation, and you could use APIs to these large language models in order to make that conversation happen. And so we set aside a group to try to develop that capacity, to learn how to do that, and to try to be in a position to offer that kind of experience on our platform. So we did that, and our teams worked on that, and we worked very hard and collaboratively for a year, more than a year, in beta to try to develop something that was right for scholarship, right? And you have the issues related to challenges with the technology, hallucination, all the things that are well talked about now. And we really wanted to be very careful about our usage of it. So we sought information from the community. We engaged with our community. We had a lot of beta participants working with it.
Probably going to
And,
laugh now.
sorry.
Please, that wasn't me. Please mute
Okay,
friends if
so
you're.
we
I
engaged
got 90
with the
people
community
listening.
to try to develop an approach that would have scholarly values at the front, that would work in a way that is not extractive from the process, And, in doing that, we came up with an approach that was pretty constrained in a way. So the way that we have a thing now on our platform called the research tool,
Mm.
and what it does is it allows a user, when they're in an article, so you've already searched in JSTOR, or you've gotten referred to JSTOR by another, by Google or by something else, and you're in the article, you're actually looking at the article, you then can pull up a tool and have a conversation with that article. So you're not doing that across the whole database at that point. You're saying, oh, in this article, the author, what are the key points of this? So examples of the way you would use it as a faculty member might say, I'm going to give a pop quiz tomorrow. What would be good points from this article? And it will talk to them and give answers. What does this article say about another country? Whatever it might be, extrapolating from the student's use of that or a faculty member's use of that. So it created that kind of conversational engagement. And but in deploying that, there's a lot of things that we had to do. We had to talk to our publishers. How do our publishers feel about the availability of this? Are they comfortable with it? Are they not comfortable with it? Libraries want to be able to have an administrative capacity to say, I'm going to turn this off for our users. At our institution, we're not going to allow anyone to use AI in any form. We try to put checks on it from a standpoint of harmful kinds of interactions. Or, if some student writes a question that looks just like that's the essay assignment from the professor, we're going to try to say, well, we don't want to answer that question. So lots of things that we've done with that research tool to try to use AI in a way that's aimed at this community and working with the community to make that happen. So that's just a kind of an example of
Mm.
something we've done, and it took a long time to do that. And as we've rolled it out, as I said, libraries have the option to turn it off. We have a small number of publishers that we're still working on to get them to say it's okay for us to use that. We think it's an enhancement. It helps make their content even more engaged, more helpful, more useful. But some small number of publishers are still angsty about it. So we try to work with the community in that way and balance the interests of everyone involved, which has been sort of a core to our set of our approach and our set of values from the beginning.
It really is. In the chat, Mark Corbett Wilson shares a link to the JSTOR interactive research tool. Thanks, Mark, for being speedy like that. Kevin, thank you for that thoughtful, deep answer, plunging back into the recent few years and diving into the process by which you built this out, which is so challenging, especially in an era where AI is so contested. Friends, I'm going to ask our guest another question, but then it's going to be over all of you. So please, as Kevin and I speak, especially as Kevin speaks, please think about what you'd like to ask, what ideas you'd like to surface or run past him, or what questions you have about AI and the scholarly corpus. Um, I have so many questions there, but it seems like what you're describing is a major benefit of generative AI is this natural language experience, both that users can enter a natural language query rather than say a Boolean search term, and then get back natural language on the way. What other potential benefits for AI should we be thinking about? And not necessarily that you want to do with JSTOR and Portico, et cetera, but that everybody involved in academia should be thinking about.
Well, I think the largest thing that I feel is possible is personalization when it
Mm.
comes to the teaching, learning, and academic enterprise. So we had we have another side of our house, which is ITHAKA S&R, and over the years we've worked in a variety of areas somewhat related to this. Adaptive learning modes in online learning, things from the MOOC era. We did a lot of work in that area at that time, and the promise of those things, even the massive online courses, was always about personalization, right? That technology would make it possible that people could get something specific to them. So,
Mm.
I
Mm.
think, and that creates all kinds of interesting opportunities and as well as challenges. So I think that the generative AI, when combined with the idea of online learning that's specific to the knowledge set of the user, is
Mm-hmm.
really, really mind-bogglingly powerful, right? So everyone has the perfect tutor. That's, conceptualized, that's, I think, the where you, if you're dreaming and you're looking out there as far as you can, um, we have this sort of interesting paradox, right? That, and it's been the real challenge of education and higher education, and that is that, um, we have this system that requires very low teacher to student ratio to be most effective, generally speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, we believe that it's better to have fewer students in the classroom and have engagement, right? I mean, so, faculty student ratios that are very low are considered to be better. That's expensive, very expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's always been assumed that if you add more people, it's not as good. But we have lecture classes with hundreds of people in them, and they work for some kinds of content. That has worked well. There's been some quote unquote productivity gains or
Mm-hmm.
lowering of overall cost per student by moving in that direction. But what I'm saying about the paradox, or sort of the interesting thing about technology, is that when you get to these modes of using, whether it's adaptive learning or it's AI, the quality of the ability to predict and make a personalized experience gets better when you have more students or you have more data. It's
Mm-hmm.
opposite, right? In the other case, it's like fewer students make a better experience. In this particular case, you need more data, more students of different kinds, more students doing different things, more students doing it this way, that way, the other way, and learning that students that lean to learn in a certain way will do better with this kind of test or with this kind of assessment or with this kind of model. And so I think when I think about like what is the most promising if it could be done well, right? And we have all kinds of reasons to be fearful about these tools. Um, the notion that everybody could have their own tutor, their own teacher, their own helper, their own researcher is a really powerful thing. And
Do you know
at some
the
level, JSTOR is kind of the first step of that because uh, in that world, everyone couldn't have the complete runs of journals. Everyone couldn't have the complete runs of most important journals. Those were saved for research libraries and people who had the benefit of being at research libraries. And now, we have thousands of institutions around the world with free access to JSTOR and lots of content available and broadly available. So I think this is just, a next step on that trend about, the technology. I see there's lots of comments. I'm talking too long, so
no,
I'll
you're doing
stop.
great. I'll help with the comments. Believe me, the personalization aspect is so powerful. I agree. This reminds me of the great science fiction novelist Neil Stephenson's famous vision of a young lady's illustrated primer, a personalized ebook that would uh, help someone learn a great deal. Um, we have more questions coming in, so I'm just going to get out of the way, Kevin, and let them come in. We have the excellent Steve Ehrman, who is located almost precisely between us right now in Maryland, former forum guest who is a great thinker. And he says this: I do research with help from Perplexity. Are JSTOR articles full text available from any such AI tools or abstracts?
That's a great question. So we can talk a little bit about what's happening in that space. So Perplexity is a special case in the sense that Perplexity is not actually an LLM. Perplexity is an answer engine that uses RAG with other LLMs to make the answer. I say that it's an important distinction because if publishers do agreements with Perplexity, Perplexity is not taking all the data from the publisher and training the model and all of that. They're actually just creating and delivering answers. So it's a little bit of a behind the scenes thing, but I want to distinguish that from if you're doing that search with ChatGPT, because that's different. ChatGPT would actually take your content, train the models, do all those types of things. So at the moment, we have conversations with all of these providers, but we do not yet have any kind of agreement where somebody has taken JSTOR content, or we've licensed JSTOR content, or content of the publishers really that JSTOR has on its site is the way I really should refer to it. We have not made any agreements or made content available to those providers so that they can use it to index the content and provide those services. Now, for 20 plus 25 years, Google has crawled our website and has the content from JSTOR, and when you do Google searches, you can find JSTOR articles and you can go to JSTOR articles. Now, the fact that you're using Google doesn't give you access to the articles. When people come to the article, they either have authorization because of their institution, or they have JPass, where they can get a free article by using what we call register and read. But they don't have access now. There are articles that are out on the web in a variety of ways. A faculty member may have put it up. We all know about LiveGen, Sci-Hub, other sites and things. And I think that many of these LLMs have used some of that. That's been documented. They're making agreements with other publishers. So I think that, having said all of that, I think that all of us that have content have to watch the users. And the fact of the matter is that users are going to go to what's convenient. They've done that forever. It's part of the reason JSTOR exists and is useful. And so it's important, I think, for content to be in the flow of where the user's going. So all things equal, we would want JSTOR content to be available when somebody uses Perplexity or uses ChatGPT or uses Claude or uses, name your tool. If that's what they're going to go use, from a mission point of view and in every way, we would want them to find the content, to be able to use the content. And so we're working through all that. What's happening, many of you probably are aware of this. Your all's behaviors, if you're on this forum, you've probably used these tools. Your behaviors change pretty quickly, right? I mean, Google was basically, you do a search, you get a list of things, and then you look at the list, and then you click on some of the list. Now we've got, overview up at the top. If you go to ChatGPT, you just get an answer. You're not necessarily getting referred to the sites. And so sites that sit downstream of these new types of tools don't get the referral traffic that they got before. Now, if those sites are directly having to generate revenue or generate the sustainability on those referrals, they're seeing a dramatic decrease in those referrals because the users are not clicking on the links. Some cases there aren't any links. Perplexity has more links than some other things, or promotes them more. But increasingly, a user is going, looking at it, getting an answer to a question, and that's it. They're not going to the list. They're not given. They may have a list, or they may not get the list. So I think that's happening obviously in the commercial world. But what I would say is that, in the academic world, at least in the short run, there is an emphasis and a requirement on sources. Where did your idea come from? Cite your sources. All of those types of things.
Sure.
Will students go to use them? I mean, I think, for all time, that's always been a challenge, right? To get the students to actually be there to learn and do the work. I think those are questions we'll see as they play out going forward.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that excellent answer. And as always, Steve, thank you for that great question. It's always a pleasure to see you here. We have more questions piling up, Kevin, and some of them are built on what you've just been talking about. Karen Belnier asks this question: could the JSTOR model allow one to determine if specific works have been incorporated into training models? She goes on to say she's thinking about if one's work was with another publisher that has such an agreement.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Karen, do you want to open your mic and join us?
Sure. I said, the answer I suspect is no, but I've often wondered that if one's work is sucked into some training model, and then how would one know if it ever was then spit back out in someone else's? Like, you can't find it once it's in there, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I don't really know enough about the structure. And so since you said kind of like JSTOR has this, isn't the LLM but accesses it, I just wondered with your reference model, I don't know, it just made me wonder if there was a way to kind of detective out whether or not Belnier 2025, which doesn't exist, was inside the training model of OpenAI because they had an agreement with XYZ publisher?
Yeah,
Does
no,
that make sense?
it's a really good question. So, so the first thing I'll say is that with respect to the research tool, we do what's called retrieval augmented generation. So we don't actually give the content to the LLM to be indexed or to be engaged in the training. We submit a prompt, and we submit some content with that prompt to create the conversational engagement, but we don't actually send the content itself. So, so in that type of model, you're not, as you say, sucking the content into the LLM in that particular case. The other question of, like, where you've seen agreements in the press, that XYZ, Reddit or XYZ has made an agreement with one of these LLMs, and they've been paid a bunch of money. They have provided that content to be used in the training. And I don't know the answer to the question of whether or not in those agreements there's something about being able to say whether what content is in there or out of there. I don't know of any standards. Others may know. It's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, in the aggregate, you could say, oh, well, I heard Wiley did a deal with Anthropic, or Wiley did a deal with so and so. So Wiley journals and books are probably in there, and maybe the authors from Wiley could ask those questions. But there's not a scaling way to do that I'm aware of.
Well, and it also came up in our campus when we were having a conversation about AI note-taking and recording of lectures, and just the kind of question came up about what do I do if my intellectual property gets, like, with like, it's supposed to be behind a password wall, but someone hacks into the password wall, so there's a breach of whatever that expected privacy is. My sense is there's no going back from that. I use the analogy, I think the eggs are in the cake. I don't think you can find them again. But again, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I think they generally say, I think that's a very good metaphor. I think they generally say, once the model is trained, you can't untrain it, or you can't pull your stuff out of it in that way, right?
And you can't validate that it's in there, right? Yeah. Like if I wanted to, and again, this is all make believe, but if I wanted to go and sue somebody because my stuff was in there, right, because of a breaking of a prompt contract or law, I don't know how I would prove that my eggs are in that cake. This is getting to be a pretty tortured metaphor.
Yeah, no, but good question.
Oh, it's a great question, Karen. Thank you for joining us. And Kevin, thank you for wrangling with it. This is, again, this has that feeling of being in the 1990s. So we're like, the web looks pretty big now, guys. We have to take care of this. There are more questions piling up, and also for Karen's question, Nathan Kelber wrote a very thoughtful answer, and so did Brent Anders. So you've got a lot of discussion happening in the chat. We have another question coming from Carolyn Holly along these lines about journals. Though journals have guidance for authors on use of AI, to what extent are they able to confirm the guidelines are followed? Is there any concern that increased author use of AI might reduce reliability of the body of knowledge published in journals?
Greg, you want to answer?
I'll put Greg on the spot.
No, I'm kidding. I'll jump in if you want to. You can. I think that it's like anything else, right? I think publishers can provide those guidelines, and faculty can provide those guidelines to students, and we can try to enforce them. And I think there are tools to try to help determine whether something has been done. But I think it's not easy to tell. There's certain things that make it, if it's poorly done, it's easier to tell. But I think I think the next question related to that is that, does the nature of the work change? Does the nature of where the value is being added change? So I'll give a really simple example, and maybe we can extend it into the environment we're talking about now. When we first started JSTOR, part of being a historian was finding the things, figuring out where the sources were that you needed to be able to make a unique argument. That was really an important part of being an historian, finding the content, and in fact, securing the content. And sometimes securing the content so nobody else could get it, right? And in fact, libraries at colleges and universities attracted the scholars because they needed access to these sources. So what that meant was that when we first started JSTOR and we were making it possible to do a full text search and find materials in the stacks, historians were against it. When we did a negotiation with the American Historical Review, they did not want to come in because they said part of being an historian is digging through the stacks. Part of the skill set is to actually find the things. It makes sense. It's not dumb. It's like that was what it meant to distinguish yourself as a historian, was to figure out how to find where things were, then make an argument with them. So if you then make it much, much easier to find where things are, then it becomes more about what argument can you make with them. If the playing field gets leveled for how you find the content, and somebody doesn't get an advantage because they happen to be sitting on a bunch of content that nobody else can get, then it becomes, how do you make the argument? So I don't want to extend that too far into the AI realm, right? But what's happening in general is that tools become available that can do things, and if that becomes a commodity and it becomes good and it's great and it works, then people, in order to distinguish themselves, have to do that plus something else. What is that plus something else? How do you take it to the next level if you don't need to use those tools anymore? Do you conclude that, well, there's really nowhere else to go, and now there's nothing new to do, it can all be done by the machine? Or does the machine do something and now we do something more, something better, we can cover more? And there was a question in the chat, I've been sort of watching that as we go, about, as an example, say doing a literature review. You know, you don't know a field, you're going to do a literature review. That used to take a long time. It still takes a long time. But like, is it a substitute to have the AI do, quote unquote, the literature review, read all these things, summarize them for you, you read them, and incorporate that? Boy, I can see both arguments on that one. I can see that as a bad thing. How does it summarize it? What bias does it bring in its summaries? Like all those things. And I think many people who are traditional scholars would say it's a loss to use AI for a literature review. But I think at the same time, you know, a scholar who's pressured to get a lot of work done and they decide this isn't the most important thing, they just kind of need to get a general sense, I'm sure they'll probably use the tool. So there's those types of really interesting questions. I think there's not a solid, it's a philosophical question that will continue to be debated.
It's an interesting twist on the descaling argument. Thank you for that, Kevin. We have more questions, and we have a clarification question that came in. You mentioned some libraries wanting to turn off access to the tool. Why was that? What was the argument they gave for that?
There are some colleges and universities that are just saying, we're not going to allow our students to use AI.
Oh, so it's AI in general.
Yeah. It's just a policy, and you know, or some subset has done that or whatever, and so the library wants to have the ability to turn it off. There have been other cases where they say, well, we don't really want to make this tool available until we can train our students, or we can help them understand what it is and what it's for. So those types of things. But my point was saying that it's not, you know, it's not everything for everyone, and we have to be able to create the ability to have some control, both for libraries to be able to control it and for publishers to have some say in that too.
Thank you. That was a good question, and thank you, Kevin, for opening the answer up. We have a quick question from our dear friend Lisa Durf, who wants to know, what are your thoughts about illicit?
About what? I'm sorry.
Illicit. ELICIT.
Yeah, I don't know it well. Why don't maybe you can jump in and tell me, remind me, because I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Oh, sure. I'll put a link to this in the chat. It's an interesting Scandinavian project, and I'm going to butcher it if I try and summarize it. Lisa, did you want to say more about that, either in chat or out loud, or we could circle back to it another time?
Yeah, this is I just jumped to the site. This is exposing the fact that that JSTOR is more of a humanities and social science. I have heard of it now that I see the site, but I think that what I would say about this, I recently read an article in a journal, and I think, in the scientific area, one of the really fascinating areas is how agentic AI is going to impact the research and learning process. And there's things moving so fast where, there's a tool that I think it's called what is it? Hold on, let me see. It's called paper to agent. It's a paper where they basically take a scientific research paper and turn it into an agent. And by an agent, I mean it's an AI bot, if you will, that can go out to the web and do a task for you. And so you say, I want to assign, I want, it's almost like, okay, I've got this grad student and I want them to do this research for me. Explain what you want them to do. This is actually using a paper you've written to create an agent like that to go out and look for material that's of a similar kind. So the nature of these things in the research tool set in the scientific and technology area is moving very, very fast.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And Lisa, thank you for raising that. I've been thinking about getting some of the leaders on Elicit in. We might do a series of programs on individual platforms if people like that. We have a comment, observation, and a question from Sheldon Armstrong. And this is very, very interesting. Sheldon writes, how far AI has been adopted within our faculty and students is a question we're asking as we see stark decreases in e-resource usage, so unique paywalled articles, over the past 2 years. This has greater implications in our cost of electronic resources and value in a world of shrinking budget dollars. Are we seeing a sign of the future where traditional usage patterns over the last 15 years are radically changing because AI is a new way for students and researchers to interrogate electronic resources?
Yeah, I think that this is a real key question. I mean, I would say that at least in JSTOR's case, the quote unquote shrinking of usage is actually quite modest. It's not stark or dramatic in this period. And I think that I think what has been more dramatic has been those that rely on Google referrals or referral traffic. That has gone down definitely. So I just want to say that just because as a matter of fact, like that we haven't seen that kind of a dramatic drop in usage. But I do think it's going that way, as we were talking about early on, that users are tending to use these AI tools to get answers and not using them to find citations or find other things to look at. So I think that is an important point. And I think that the community will adapt or will need to adapt to the way that users go after the information. Now, the interesting question is whether people have to get the answer and get the right answer, or they get any answer. And so I think that what I mean by that is do you have to go and find the content that's really directly relevant to what you're trying to do and cite that content, or do you just find what you can, and so you don't have to go to sites or go to original sources or document them. So I do think that we got to watch the way these patterns change. So the question about whether we're seeing a sign of the future where traditional usage patterns are changing, I think yes. I think the patterns are changing, and so the question is, how do you make sure that important, unique, well-researched, high-quality content is in the conversation, in the research conversation? And I think all of us have a responsibility to ensure that that's the case. Now, the question of whether something is open access or free or a paid resource, paywalled resource, is a conversation that is related to that. in the sense that these papers need to be sustained somehow. The work has to be sustained. And so you have to kind of factor that in. And, as was pointed out in this thread earlier, when it comes to whether, whether it's a publisher or an author who wants to have some control over whether or not their content is going to be brought into an LLM, the open access content's already in the LLM. You didn't have that option to control that. Other type, things behind a paywall, technically, that they can make a decision as to whether or not that content should be in an LLM. So there are trade-offs in terms of all over the place as these things change. So definitely the case that things are changing.
Indeed, indeed. In the chat, Nathan Kelber observes there's a shift from SEO, search engine optimization, to GEO, generative engine optimization, adopting content strategy to be discoverable and cited by AI systems and agents. And how to turn that into financial flow is a really, really good question.
I think there's a lot of talk about that, and that's kind of what I was talking about with respect to, is it possible, or what's the best way to have your content, the old word was indexed, so that it could be found by a search engine, and what's the equivalent in the generative AI space? And there's one level of that, which is like, okay, well, do you have your content be absorbed into the LLM model so that when the answer is given, can they give you a citation? And the earlier question about Perplexity is trying to make a position for themselves in that, where they try to frontline or highlight the fact that they use sources and they point people to the sources. So they're sort of halfway between, a little bit like Google with overviews. But I think that this question of how you get into the workflow of users that are using these tools is a fundamental question, because I think you need to get into that quote unquote channel. And that's going to be a growth area for how people use content. If, as we see, other types of more traditional, so online models for search and discovery, going down.
Yeah. There's an Axios piece that called this Google Zero Doomsday. At least one online publishing site talked about how they were shifting away from making digital stuff to doing more offline face-to-face events. There's a lot going on there. I do want to make sure that we get to everybody's questions, and our good friend Raymond Yee, who is an API expert, asked a really interesting question. And Kevin, you already partially answered this, but I want to make sure you get a chance to say more if there's more to be said. Does JSTOR currently provide machine interfaces, such as APIs or text data mining facilities, for researchers and educators? And how might those evolve as generative AI and agent technologies become more integrated into scholarly workflows?
Yeah, that's a great question, and very timely. Right now, Anthropic created a standard called MCP, that is, if you will, the API, the layer that that one can use to present oneself to agents. And the idea is that you use this this standard to be able to make yourself available, to the agents, and so that agents can find your content easily and use your content easily. Obviously, MCP itself is like a lot of first standards, great standard, it's amazing, it's awesome, it has the standard, and then everybody can kind of deploy an MCP standard, but there are a lot of hard questions that are not incorporated in the standard, around things like, do you have access? Do you, are you authorized for the access? You're not. What can you do with it? What you can't do with it? All those types of things. So, but I think that is one of the ways of the future. The direct answer to your question is that we do not currently have an MCP interface to JSTOR to talk to the agents. Although we have, we're working on them to be aware of them. The other thing is that some of the companies that have LLM models are working with these sort of intermediaries in the space that will take content and turn it into tokens and then, you know, have an MCP kind of layer. In other words, just a facilitator between a publisher and an LLM that makes it so the publisher doesn't actually give their content to the LLM. It sits sort of middle space in a protected way, and then there's an MCP server going to the LLM. So there's things going on to try to evolve into this, and that's the territory we're kind of looking at and trying to make sure. Again, the broad goal again for us from all this work, and I'm sharing a lot of like what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing. Fundamentally, we want our content to be accessible as broadly as possible. We want as many people to use it as possible at every kind of level and every kind of place. And so we're trying to figure out the best ways to make that possible, because that's the maximum impact we can have as an organization, and from a standpoint of our mission. So how do we make that happen? So we're trying to be aware of these new technologies and how different how users are finding convenient ways to get access to the content.
Indeed, this is such a time of so much possibility. In the chat,
can I say just a couple things? I want to make sure that I highlight, you know, we were talking JSTOR all the way through this. You know, ITHAKA, also we have a unit called ITHAKA SNR, and ITHAKA SNR is doing a lot of direct work on the, if you will, on the application side of this at colleges and universities. So we're working very hard in SNR with college universities on AI literacy, and we build these AI literacy cohorts and engage with institutions about the way that they're, you know, using AI on campus, how they're you know, what their policies are, what's their curricula, those types of things, and sharing in that community. What are others doing? You know, trying to create a community where, hey, what is this institution doing? What's that institution doing? And you know, so I would point you to the AI work that ITHAKA SNR is doing on that side of the house. We also created in the early days something we call the product tracker, so that people could get a sense of the different products that were coming out that were happening in the scholarly community. And so that's something that's maintained on the site. And one of the things that we generally have found with respect to the deployment of AI in the college university environment is that it's really, really not systematized at this point. You know, some campuses, individual faculty are going off and doing one thing. You know, sometimes the Centers for Research and Learning, or the Centers for Teaching and Learning, are playing a big role. Some places libraries, some places those two groups together, sometimes departments. It's very ad hoc right now and somewhat chaotic. And I think people are all feeling the pressure to move, and in some cases resisting the pressure to move. And so there's a lot of different things going on there. So I think tracking that is valuable, and our team in SNR is doing that. So for those of you who want to follow that side of it, I just wanted to highlight that we have that work going on.
Oh, they're great people, and we've had some of them on this program before, and I'm really glad to hear that. In the chat, people are throwing in all kinds of stuff, including a lot of support for your call for AI literacy. Bryn, we're coming up on the last 8 minutes of our program today, friends. So if you've got a question bubbling up, this is a really good time to share it. Renee Schmauder asks this: what is the exponential impact of using these tools on critical thinking? And will this potentially become less of an issue as the tools become more sophisticated?
It's a great question, and I'm really not expert to answer that one. It's you know, I do think it's related to what I was saying earlier. If you can do something easily, what's the next hard thing that you're going to do? And I think critical thinking is a big part of it. And so can these tools be built in a way to support the process of encouraging someone into critical or deep thinking about a topic? Or are they just, and some people will just say like, well, students who don't want to learn, they'll just go ahead and use the AI. But if you want to learn and you want to understand the concept, and now you have a tool to help you in the parts that you don't need to do, I can definitely see where that could be a huge boon, like a real improvement. It gets to the question of what are you trying? I mean, this is an oversimplification, clearly, but what are you trying to accomplish? And if what you're trying to accomplish is deep learning or yourself, you know, critical thinking, then you're not going to use the tool to not learn that. So, I mean, I don't, gross oversimplification, and I'm not saying that that's a solution to the student issue, but I think the question is, the tool itself can help people do these things. It doesn't supplant it. It does part of the work for you in a particular way.
Well, that's a really, really good set of remarks. In the chat, by the way, just Jermaine posts not a question, but just a comment that they're starting grad school, and the research methods for AI seem overwhelming and confusing. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable is confusing. Completely understood, Jermaine, and good luck. We're here to help you if we can. There's a question from Dennis Saulnier, who says that his hunch that there's value for us in terms of how you've chosen to approach understanding and incorporating AI internally. How do you organize this research and experimentation? Is it done through JSTOR labs?
So, yeah, Dennis, maybe we can also talk offline. Nice to see you. You know, that's a great question, and I'll say we're very fortunate that in our organization, it's very much a learning organization. We're committed to learning, and so I think when ChatGPT came out, you know, some people were more or less excited about digging in, but by and large in the organization, there was a lot of interest, and so we really just had to figure out a way to just make that energy, channel that energy in a positive way. So we did not structure around, we did structure around it in the sense that we wanted to build, as I said earlier, that beta research tool. So we put a team aside to do that. But very soon thereafter, a lot of people wanted to get engaged with that. And we did a lot of work to help people to learn about AI in the organization, not necessarily for any particular purpose, but just to get people comfortable with it in a variety of ways. And so people started thinking about different ways they could use it. So, you know, it really, honestly, it ended up being very much an organic grassroots kind of thing, with a little bit of guidance and need to do it, but it wasn't like a top-down thing, you know. I mean, I definitely am being honest that I had this like feeling like in November that something we had to do. And at some level I was impatient for us to move forward. But I think in the end, it was really the team that made that possible. And I would like to say one other thing about the power of this technology, and especially as it relates back 30 years and what I said earlier about it being exciting right now. And I only have a minute to just touch on this, but we're doing another project that we're doing after we learned about this from the research tool is the use of generative AI in the processing of unique special collections and primary source materials. So every college, every library in the world has a long backlog of materials that they have, unique materials that would be extremely valuable, cultural heritage, need to be preserved for the world, that because of lack of resources and staff are not processed. Even if they're digital, they're not processed. And so the introduction of these generative AI tools, we went around the country for more than a year talking to libraries about their challenges. And one thing that just came back over and over again is these backlogs of content on in their collections and their inability to steward those collections. And I believe generative AI can play a big role. We have a product called SeekLight, a service called SeekLight, connected into something at JSTOR called JSTOR Stewardship, that we think can make it so much faster to process these special collections. And again, you have to do it in the right way. You have to do it in a way that helps the librarian archivist be able to take better care and accelerate that process. But I just wanted to highlight that we're also, when we see these opportunities, we're trying to see how they can be used in service of the mission, in service of the community, to try to lower the costs and increase the potential access. Because ultimately, I believe that what we all would love to see is that there are millions and millions of documents, millions and millions of objects that are held by libraries as cultural heritage of the planet that are not accessible. And as we talk about how people get access to information in the future, will never be seen, will never be accessible. If we can find out ways to lower the cost of that 100 times, 1,000 times, then materials, you know, like that are the unique letters of faculty members or famous people or not, ephemera from a protest, whatever it might be, those materials will be available to the world if we can figure out how to use these technologies to make that possible. And so I see something in the future that looks very much like JSTOR journals, but instead it's primary source and cultural heritage materials that are now available all over the planet because we've been able to use this technology in a way that had never been possible before.
Thank you. That's a great global image to think about this, and brings us back to the beginning of our conversation, how to intersect AI along with the world of cultural heritage. We have time for one last question, and this is our dear friend Bonnie D, the University of Michigan librarian. And Bonnie, what is your question for Kevin?
Well, first I want to thank Kevin. Kevin, that was a beautiful summary there because I'm right on that train. But I did have a couple things that I wanted to mention real quick. Someone was trying to create metadata, and the AI was busy looking for a Library of Congress control number or an ISBN number or a World Cat number, and it couldn't find it, so it made one up. It was sort of like a little kid, where the parents say, did you do this? And I'm supposed to say something, and so I'm going to create it. So that's one problem that has to be solved, and it'll get solved. The other thing is we do want to preserve the content the way it was initially. And one of the most wonderful examples of this is from the short title catalog, Captain John Smith's General History of Virginia from 1624. How many iterations of that exist? Every time it got back to Britain, it got more and more censorship, because first there were images and then there were words, etc. I don't want somebody going through and beautifying this into modern day Pollyanna. I want to see what it was like originally. Every little detail, every little illustration, because that's part of the deductive process in scholarship. And I do want to thank you again, Kevin, because your summary was so apt and so wonderful, because we want to increase potential access to primary resource materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say to your point on the first point, that it's really important to deploy these tools with a human involved. And so I think you've got to create a tool set that make it possible for a human to validate the data. And now not every piece of data, right? So over time, as you say, it's going to get better at certain kinds of things, and you're going to get more comfortable that this is right. And there are ways to provide measures and tool sets that say we have high confidence that these fields are well converted, or less confidence in other cases. So what we're testing and in developing this new service, which is really just in a charter period, we're working very closely with the libraries to develop those tools and make sure that we can put these into the hands of the users and the archivists and the data folks to do it in a way that both makes it possible to improve those metadata and do it faster, but be able to validate it. And I think on the second point, I think we got to hope that it can be a both and, right? That we can make a version of this available to anyone on the planet, and then yet still keep those unique versions, right? Like, so, and we should identify that this is this version and not a different version, and not try to sanitize it. But hopefully, you can have both, where you get a facsimile of it that's a digital version that people can use to learn on it, and then they can try to get to the library if they could, for the deep researcher scholar that wants to do the kind of work you mentioned.
Well, thank you for that great question, Bonnie. And I'm sure people have just run off and checked out all the Smith texts they could find. And Kevin, thank you for that great answer, but also thank you for being a fantastic guest. We are out of time somehow. We have blazed through an hour, thanks to your intellectual horsepower and all the deep informed experience that you had, and all the thoughtful reflections and speculations. I'm just delighted that you could join us. Kevin, what's the best way to keep up with you in your work?
I mean, I'm probably not the greatest at that. I'm sort of very always focused on the work itself. But yeah, people can just reach out to me. Obviously, we have a lot of information on the websites, the ITHAKA website. We blog posts. Maybe I think Heidi's online can point us to a couple things. But just I'm not an active social media person. I'm somewhat sad to say. It's not my area for whatever reason, I have to admit to. But we do community letters, blog posts, those types of things. But I'm also very happy to come out If people want to invite me to be somewhere and chat about things, talk about what we're learning, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I'm so glad.
And maybe this is further motivation, Brian, that I should write more and get out there a bit more. But ITHAKA.org, as Heidi just put on the list, is our sites where a lot of the different things you can find, our community letters or social media accounts, all those types of things.
Well, on behalf of the entire planet, Kevin, I think more writing from you would be great. So thank you.
You're kind to say that.
Thank you so much for joining us, friends. So just to wrap up, everybody, if you haven't had a chance to yet, please accept my thanks for being great interlocutors, Kevin. You have wonderful questions and thoughts. The Future Transform is approaching our 10th anniversary in just a few months. So we have a whole archive online you can find by going to going to our whole website. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. And in the meantime, since we've gone over, let me just say thank you all for being with us. Please take care, everybody. Be well, and we'll see you next time online.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Kevin.